Straight ahead, the year in Texas politics. As 2025 ends and 2026 begins, we'll look back at the biggest stories that impacted Texas politics last year, from the deadly Central Texas floods to redistricting and school choice. Plus, sizing up the U.S. Senate race, we'll look ahead and discuss the biggest contest for both Democrats and Republicans in Texas this year. Good morning, I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas starts now. Happy New Year and welcome to Eye on Politics. Hope your 2026 is off to a great start. Well, 2025 is now in the history books, and it was a Texas-sized year for politics in the Lone Star State, from redistricting to school choice and to the horrific and tragic flooding in Central Texas that killed at least 135 people, including children, at Camp Mystic. It's not often we air panel discussions, but when we do, we like to speak with some of the best political reporters at the Texas Capitol. Brad Johnson, formerly of the Texan, and Jasper Scherer, politics editor of the Texas Tribune. And we start with the deadly flooding.
Well, first off, there's going to be a lot of litigation ongoing for years to come between particularly parents of the children who died at Camp Mystic. I'm sure there will be others too, especially for the standalone people that were in the campsite that were swept away. Yeah. On the legislative front, there were bills passed, regulations established, and now they have to put it into action. And there's going to be a lot of friction with that implementation. A lot of camps have suggested they're going to be forced to close if they don't comply with this. That comes with, for some of them, a pretty large expenditure in terms of moving cabins away from the floodplain. So a lot of stuff left to come on this, and it's going to be felt for years to come.
Jasper.
Yeah, I think Brad touched on some of the regulations that were put in place by the legislature over the summer in response. I think that'll be one of the more kind of immediate effects that we'll see, just, requiring these overnight camp operators to come up with emergency plans with, evacuations just aimed at preventing, a repeat of the horror that we saw on July 4th. Prohibiting the state from issuing licenses when these camps have cabins in certain, dangerous floodplain areas. So I think, just going forward, clearly this issue is being taken more seriously.
And the other thing that we saw is these outdoor warning sirens already start going up in Kerr County, where they never put these up. What do you make of that? I knew this was going to happen pretty quickly, because when people realized that there were no warning sirens in these areas, it was shocking.
Yeah, and clearly that was one of the first requirements put in place by the legislature for this in response to it. It's one of those situations where you never think you need it until you do. And, these localities put off these expenditures for years and years until something like the catastrophe like this happens. And then they have no choice.
So let's talk about another big story this year, which we're still really seeing the repercussions, and that is redistricting.
I think one big takeaway is just that this sort of showed how Republicans had completely solidified their grasp of the legislature and really just sort of eviscerated any chance of pushback from Democrats. I think that had already been the case for some sessions, but this session really, when you pair this with some of the other issues where Republicans just got their way, checked off a lot of boxes on big kind of white whale issues that had evaded them for years, then you go into the special session where Democrats did really pretty much everything they could have to put up roadblocks, make life difficult for Republicans, and even you look at the initially favorable court ruling for Democrats striking down the map. Even with that, you eventually get to the Supreme Court, and the map stays in place. So I think just Democrats put out all the stops they could, and at the end of the day, there was nothing they could do. I think one other takeaway as well is that, looking at kind of the national picture here, because I think Texas sort of set off this big arms race, we're still seeing that reverberate in other states. It does seem like this is essentially turning out to be a wash in some ways. I mean, still some maps left to be drawn or potentially not drawn. We don't know how the full national picture will look, but it's definitely looking like with Indiana not going ahead with its redistricting that Republicans aren't seeing the national benefit from this that they maybe initially expected going into the Texas fight.
Brad.
Well, the Supreme Court ruling, in my mind, solidified what we always knew about this. This was a pure power play. This was drawn for partisan gain. The president said that explicitly, and the Supreme Court's ruling reflected that. Now, Republicans made it a lot harder on themselves than it had to be by invoking race in certain areas. The DOJ letter won't go into all the details on that, but that caused a whole host of problems for Republicans, and shooting themselves in the foot on that nearly cost them their new map. So they were playing with fire quite a bit legally throughout this. But they're also playing with fire politically, because there's no guarantee they win all these seats, and it's looking like a really difficult cycle for them next year. And I don't think they win all these seats, all 5 of these.
So let's talk about school choice and school funding, another huge issue this past year. Obviously, the governor got his school choice program across the finish line because he had, really a campaign for it hard across the state, also went after the Republicans in the Texas House who opposed it. And so we saw that bear out. Now, the Texas Comptroller's Office is charged with putting this all together. What do you think the major challenges are for Acting Comptroller Kelly Hancock in getting this off the ground? Brad, we'll start with you.
What comes to mind is the same thing as Obamacare. Getting people to actually sign up, it can be difficult, and if they don't know about it, or they don't feel like it's worth going through the trouble of signing up, then they're not going to. There's a lot of logistical hurdles like that when the rubber meets the road are going to determine, the success, or however we're gauging the success of this program. Does it max out the number of kids that they have allotted with the $1 billion? And then if that happens, is that justification to then expand it down the road, or do they need to shrink it? Do they need to tinker at the margins? When actually implementing law happens, it's messy, and there's going to be problems crop up. There's going to be examples of abuse and fraud. It's just a question of how the state deals with it, and what guidelines they put in place, guardrails they put in place to prevent that after things do pop up.
And don't you think, Brad, the biggest challenge, or Jasper, the biggest challenge is going to be, does the state attract enough low-income and disabled students? Because that's what the Republican leadership really wanted to focus on, prioritize these groups of students. And if that doesn't come to pass, could that prove to be a political problem for Republicans? Because we're going to know, the rollout is going to start, this is going to start in the fall before the election.
Right.
So do you think that has some potential political traps here?
I think it could, absolutely. You're absolutely right that was sort of a big selling point, and that was one of the big changes towards the end of the process that ended up getting this bill across the finish line. Was they made some changes to ensure that increase the likelihood that these vouchers or ESAs would go to lower income folks. So I think that's absolutely a risk or a potential pitfall if it turns out that a bunch of high income folks are disproportionately benefiting from these ESAs. But if you look ahead to the 2027 legislative session and beyond, I think the conversation from here on out is going to be really about where does this initial version of the program go from here? How do we expand it? What sorts of tweaks are made to, in terms of how the vouchers are distributed. So I think, if we, at the same time, if a bunch of these do end up going disproportionately to upper income folks, there is always going to be an opportunity to for lawmakers to course correct, when they return to Austin, if that's the way they want to go.
Up next, Brad and Jasper and I discuss the upcoming March primary and the biggest contest, the one for the U.S. Senate, when Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas comes right back. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. Now that 2026 is here, the Democratic and Republican candidates will be sprinting to the March 3rd primary. I spoke with Jasper Scherer, politics editor of the Texas Tribune, and Brad Johnson, formerly of the Texan, about the biggest political contest this year, the U.S. Senate race. And we discussed the Republican and Democratic primaries.
Both primaries are going to be fascinating, but just thinking of the Democratic side, I think Jasmine Crockett's candidacy is, sort of the initial discussion surrounding her. A lot of it has been about her pitch is that she, thinks that there's all this kind of untapped potential in the electorate that, kind of go back to the refrain that Democrats have sounded for some time now, that Texas is not a red state, it's a non-voting state. Crockett's really leaning into that with her campaign and sort of centering her pitch around the idea that she is best positioned to unlock these kind of disaffected, non-voting folks who lean to the left. So that, it's going to be interesting to see if Democratic voters, if enough of them buy that argument, if, how many folks are voting, based on which candidate they think is the most electable, and how many of them see Talrico versus Crockett as that person who's best equipped to defeat the Republican incumbent. But it's going to be a crazy amount of money, millions of dollars thrown around. You're looking at two of the best fundraisers in the party in Texas, if not nationally.
Brad.
There was a poll put out recently on the race, and Crockett was expectedly in first. I think it was 51-43 over Talrico. But the more interesting questions that I saw in this showed two paths, really, for Democratic voters in Texas. The one asked which candidate they believe mobilizes the Democratic base more, and that was Jasmine Crockett. The other question asked was which candidate they believe expands the tent more, brings in more crossover voters or even soft Republican voters, and that was Talrico. So Texas Democrats have two choices. They can choose one of two paths here, and both candidates, of course, will try and do both. But even their voters are seeing a clear delineation between the two in terms of their skill sets and what they bring to the table. Do they pick, like Jasper said, do they pick the person they think has the best chance to win in November next year? Jasmine Crockett is saying that is her. Clearly, she's in first place in the primary, but James Talrico still thinks he can win the primary as well. So the strategy is going to be fascinating to watch, how they message themselves to voters. And then, obviously, whoever emerges, they're going to try and move more to the middle because this is still a red state. It's not Oklahoma in terms of partisan leaning, but it is still a red state.
I do think electability in the Democratic primary is going to be the number one issue for Democratic voters to sort out. And one thing we know is that a whole bunch of Republicans, including the lieutenant governor, told me last week that he sees if Congresswoman Crockett is the standard bearer, if she is the Democratic nominee, that she is going to energize and mobilize every single Republican to come out and vote against her and for the Republican, whoever it is. What do you make of that argument?
I can already see the ads being cut. There's the comment she made, and whether it's out of context or not, it doesn't matter because it's going to be used. Yeah. It is the comment about South Texas Hispanics who voted Trump having, quote, slave mentality. You're a fool if you don't believe that those ads are already cut for Republicans, and they will tie everyone down ballot to her if she is the nominee. Now, maybe she can counteract that and disprove it enough if there is room for disapproval in order to cancel that out. But Republicans are banking on sticking Jasmine Crockett to every single Democrat down ballot, just like national Republicans are trying to stick Zohran Mamdani, the new mayor of New York City, to all Democrats across the country. The strategy is already laid out. It's already happening. It's just a question of whether it actually works.
Jasper?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that Crockett would unlock more Republicans than Talrico. Just sort of on paper, you look at some of the more inflammatory comments that she's made, and just the degree to which Republicans are kind of licking their chops to put those comments in all of their ads, as Brad was just saying. But and I think we could look back to historical examples when Beto O'Rourke was running against Ted Cruz in 2018. There was a lot made about, Beto turning out all these legions of Democratic voters to vote for him. But on the flip side, Cruz was, I think, quite effective as well at sort of framing O'Rourke as this flaming liberal and, kind of painting that race as a battle for the future of Texas. And, you saw a hefty Republican turnout in that race, too. So we definitely have like historical precedent for, kind of a not inflammatory, but just, if Republicans see a threat, they've been able to activate their base, based on who is running on the Democratic side. So definitely think Crockett we could see the same effect if she's the nominee.
Let's talk about the Republican Senate primary. Obviously, this has been really going on since April. With the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, challenging Senator Cornyn, and then you have Wesley Hunt coming in the fall. And so the latest I saw from Decision Desk HQ was Paxton leading at, I believe, 32%, Cornyn at 27%, and Hunt at 23%, with still a lot of people undecided. People really haven't focused on it, but after the first of the year, I think they are going to start focusing on it. And one of the questions I have is, does Paxton's divorce, which has been very well publicized, does that hurt him among some of his support? Whoever wants to start first.
It certainly is hurting among some Republican voters, and we now see, I'm aware of multiple people in my life that I know who they're not a fan of Cornyn because of his politics, and they're not a fan of Paxton because of his baggage, and now they have a third option, Wesley Hunt. Now, I don't think that's enough to put Wesley Hunt into the runoff, but it can take away from Paxton. It could also take away from Cornyn, and we'll see how the votes actually shake out. But this is heading to a runoff one way or another because Hunt entered the race. And in all likelihood, it's going to be Paxton in first in the primary, Cornyn in second, unless Wesley Hunt can work a miracle on it. But I'm not really, because of what has happened nationally, particularly with Donald Trump and being the face of the party and the personal baggage he had that didn't matter in the Republican primary. I'm not sure it's going to have a huge effect, but Cornyn's going to throw everything at the wall and try and make it stick.
Jasper.
I mean, it certainly hasn't cost him to this point, not necessarily his divorce specifically, but just his other baggage. He has shown himself to be so Teflon-like that it's kind of hard to look at this latest development and say, okay, this is going to be the thing that really causes voters to turn away from him. That said, in past primaries that Paxton has been in, I guess there has been, at least in one case, an alternative option when George P. Bush was running against him in the primary. And I think Wesley Hunt maybe is trying to pitch himself as a more conservative challenger. I think folks were maybe queasy about getting on board with Bush back in 2022, just because they weren't as comfortable with his, conservative bona fides. But, we saw Paxton face a challenger back then when he had, ongoing legal troubles hanging over his head that have since been resolved. So, it's hard to see the divorce itself causing a mass exodus from the Paxton camp.
My thanks to Jasper Scherer and Brad Johnson. Up next, Sarah Jenkins and The Brief when Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas returns.
I'm Sarah Jenkins with The Brief. In a partial legal victory for the Trump administration, a federal judge ruled that Immigration and Customs Enforcement can tap into Medicaid information to help track down undocumented immigrants. ICE can now receive basic information to identify, arrest, and deport people suspected of living in the U.S. illegally. That can include immigration status of individuals, nationality, their address, phone numbers, and date of birth. The judge blocked ICE from accessing sensitive medical records and data on American citizens and lawful permanent residents. Generally speaking, immigrants in the U.S. are not eligible for Medicaid, but some states are required to provide emergency care regardless of immigration status. For The Brief, I'm Sarah Jenkins.
Thanks, Sarah. And remember, you can watch our full discussion with Brad Johnson and Jasper Scherer on our CBS Texas YouTube page. And while you're there, please hit the subscribe button. And that's all for Eye on Politics today. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening to you at CBS News Texas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next Sunday. And from all of us here, have a great weekend and Happy New Year once again.